How's every?
So we'll take a look at Daf Lamed Aleph, and we'll start with Tanur Rabbanon on the second line. Succa Gzula. He stole a sukkah, and there are different variations of stealing a sukkah. Either you can actually take somebody out of his sukkah, throw him out, and take over the sukkah, or you could take wood that you stole from someone and use the wood and make it into schach or make it into tefanos. But in any event, this brisa opens up with the shita of Rabbi Eliezer and then records a machlokes. Sukkah gzula v'mesachech b'rshus harabim. In both of these cases, Rabbi Eliezer posel v'chachamim machshirim. So in the case of Sukkah Gzula, I think we can understand Rabbi Eliezer, because when you steal something and you use it for a mitzvah, like let's say, for example, you steal a lulav and you use it for a mitzvah, you're not yotze. That's the name of this parak, lulav hagazul. And the same thing should apply to a sukkah. The only difference is that maybe because sukkah is karka, it's connected to the ground, so we have a principle called karka ein an exelis. But again, that's a machlokas whether karka and exelis or not an exelis. Assuming there is gezel, in the case of karka, I understand Rabbi Eliezer in Sukkah Gzula. What's the problem with Rishus HaRabim? And it would seem that the karka is owned by the public. It belongs to the Rabbim, and he's now stealing part of the Rishus HaRabim. That also constitutes a Sukkah Gzula. And let's see how we can understand this machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim. Amar Rav Nachman, machlokas bishet tokef es chavero v'otzio misukaso. The case is not a case where he stole metaltalin, i.e. he stole the wood for the sukkah, but rather he stole a sukkah by forcing a person out of a sukkah. He literally removes him from the sukkah. For Rabbi Eliezer l'tamei, and what we're seeing here is Rabbi Eliezer consistent to his shita back on Daf Chav Zayin, where Rabbi Eliezer derives to the pasuk lecha. It says Sukas Shivas Yomim Tases Sukkah. It says, what does it say? It says Chag HaSukkos Yeh Lachem Shivas Yomim Lachem. And Rabbi Eliezer derives to the pasuk Lachem that it has to be your sukkah, or at least it has to be owned by shutfim, by partners. And now the Gemara is going to analyze that in the case where you evict someone from his sukkah, you take over his sukkah, then mimanavshach, it's not going to be yours. And it won't be lachem. Why is that? The Amar Rabbi Eliezer says, Ein Adam Yotzi Yedei Chavasa B'Sukkos Shel Chavero. I Karka Nigzeles. We have a machlokes tanoim, whether or not you can steal karka and take it out of the rishus of the owner. Let's say you take it out of the rishus of the owner, that's real gzela. So you're not just sitting in someone else's sukkah without his permission, that's bad enough. But worse than that, you've actually stolen the sukkah. The sukkah is now considered out of the rishus of the nigzal and in the rishus of the gazlan. And that gives the sukkah the status of a sukkah gzula, which means that it's not yours. It's stolen. Hence, according to Rabbi Eliezer, who derives from the pasuk lecha, that you have to own your own sukkah, this is a stolen sukkah. The inami karka ain't an exelis, but let's assume we don't know, although actually the Gemara elsewhere, Bava Kama knows exactly what Rabbi Eliezer holds, but right now, for our purposes here in Masechet Succa, we don't know what Rabbi Eliezer would hold. Let's say he maintains that karka ain't an exelis. You cannot remove karka from the rishus of the bailim because wherever it is on the face of the earth, it's considered his rishus. You can't move the karka out of the rishus. So if that be the case, then for sure you're not yotze your mitzvah of sukkah because sukkah she'ulahi. You've borrowed someone's sukkah, and Rabbi Eliezer derives from the word lecha, that has to be your sukkah. So this sukkah, where you throw the guy out of his sukkah, fits into one of two categories. If I hold karka exelis, it's a sukkah gzula, and therefore it's disqualified. If, on the other hand, I hold karka ain't an exelis, then it's not gzula because you can't take karka out of someone's rishus, but it's she'ula, and it's not yours for sure. Okay, so that's as far as Rabbi Eliezer is concerned. Rabbanan don't have the drasha of lecha to require that you own your sukkah, litamayu, and therefore they're being very consistent. The amri adam yotzi dechavas v'sukkah shel chavera. Yeah, but now we're going to have to enter into the minefield, the military, the machlokes about whether karka is nixelis or not. So we're going to have to assume, according to Rabbanan, karka ain't an exelis, which means that it's not a stolen sukkah. Everybody agrees that a stolen sukkah is possible. But rather, if karka ain't an exelis, it's not a stolen sukkah, it's a sukkah she'ula. And according to Chachamim, you could be yotze with a sukkah she'ula. You could invite me into your sukkah, and I could be yotze my mitzvah in your sukkah. And even if you didn't invite me into your sukkah, and I borrowed it against your will by evicting you from the sukkah, nevertheless, it's still considered a sukkah she'ula, which according to Rabbanon is kosher. So if you take a look at Rashi, about 10 lines down from the top, Rashi says, sukkah gzulahi, Rabbi Eliezer dorish tasa lecha. It says, chaga sukkahs tasa lecha, mishalcha v'lo gzula v'lo she'ula. V'i ein an exeles, v'kol hayomim b'shus ba'al lehi, because karka ain't an exeles, Avilei she'ula, which according to Rabbi Eliezer, apostles the sukkah for your mitzvah. Upluktehi ba'gozel, equal amount the omer karka nixeles the dorish ribuy of miut, equal amount the omer karka ain't nixeles the dorish klal uprat. Rabbanu l'kamayu the amri yotze oda b'sukkah shena shalo b'she'ula. Usvir lahu the karka ain't an exeles. The Rabbanan he the amrinon the amri b'perka gozel the karka ain't an exeles. So we know that the Rabbanan are being very consistent, allowing you to be yotze your mitzvah of sukkah in a case where you were tokef es chaver v'otzir misukaso because karka ain't an exeles upligi alei to Rabbi Eliezer Nami. And they reject Rabbi Eliezer's assumption, Behad Exelas Karka. So on both counts, the Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Eliezer. First of all, on the count of Karka Gzula, and they hold Karka in Exelis. And secondly, She'ula is okay because they don't hold from the drasha of Lecha, Mishalcha. Now, Rashi is wondering why the Gemara vacillates here with regard to Rabbi Eliezer about karka nixelis or karka ain't nixelis, and Rav Nachman investigates both possibilities when, in fact, we know that the truth be told, Rabbi Eliezer holds in Agozel that karka nixelis, and therefore it's a sukkah gzula, and you don't even have to enter into the issue of lecha and pasel she'ula. Why don't you just say straight away, Rabbi Eliezer lishitaso, that karka nigzelis, and Rabbi Eliezer therefore would say it's a sukkah gzula. Forget about sukkah she'ula. Now, why does Rabbi Eliezer hold the karka nigzelis? So Rashi gives an explanation for karka nigzelis, and he says the miyashe bailamine kishar metalton. They're just like in metalton, we say there's yerush, and he doesn't hold out much hope for retrieving his object once it was stolen. The same thing applies in karka. He has yerush. Now, through yerush, Rashi says the karka is becheskas gazlan rabbanon l'taime the amri karka ain't exelis, meaning there's no such thing as yerush unless it's guzzled, but it's not guzzled because karka ain't exelis. It's like the Gemara has in Bab Mitzia and the Eilu Mitzias that if you left something up on your attic, you don't remember where you put it, and you were Misyayish, you gave up hope that you'll ever find it. Yesh is not chal, it's not naveda, it's up in your attic, it's in your domain, it's in your rishus. And that's the status of karka and yesh and karka after gzela, according to Rabbana. Usha'ulahi, but now you have another problem. Okay, it's not gzula, but it's she'ula, it's not yours. Okay, fine. The Rabbanan don't require ownership over a sukkah. The reason why Rav Nachman, when he analyzes the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, he mentions the possibility of karka ein and exelis and therefore she'ula, is because he wants lafuki, he wants to make sure we don't make a mistake and come to the conclusion that if it were she'ula, it would be a kosher sukkah. No, even if karka ain't an exelis, theoretically, if Rabbi Eliezer would have accepted that position, it would still be possible for him because it is she'ula. Oh, this is the machlokes, says Rav Nachman, between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan. And to summarize, it's really a twofold machlokes. A, is karka nigzelis, or the Rabbanan shitated exelis, and therefore it's not gzula. And B, even if I grant you that it's not gzula, but it's she'ula, but the Rabbanan hold that she'ula is kosher. Avo, but here's the case where everybody would agree that you cannot be yotzi of mitzvah sukkah. Gazal eitzim, you stole metaltalin, b'sichech bohem, and he used them for schach. Divrei hakol, ein lo elo dmei eitzim. Just 1 second. So wait a minute. I said that if it's got, there are two cases of gazal eitzim. One is gazal eitzim, and he uses the eitzim as defanos. I'm jumping the gun a little. We didn't get up to that yet. First, we're talking about gazal eitzim v'sichech bohem. Now, gazal eitzim v'sichech bohem has to do with another sugya, also in Bava Kama, called the sugya of shinui. So when if a person steals metaltalin, then if there's a shinui, he acquires full ownership over the metaltalin. Now, there are two categories of shinui. There's shini Hashem and there's shini rishus. In this case of schach, we have an overlap of both categories of shinui. It's shini Hashem because nobody calls it wood anymore. Now we call it a sukkah, schach. And at the same time, it's a shini maisa in the sense that he changed the function of the eitzim. It's no longer pieces of wood. It's now schach. So you have shini maisa and shini Hashem. And in both cases, he acquires ownership over the schach. And Elo Elitme Eitzim. The Nigzal only has recourse for compensation, monetary compensation for the wood that was stolen and used as schach. So basically, it's no longer guzzle. Guzzle means when you have a chiyuv hashava, ve'eshiv zagzela shar guzzle. But if the gazel makes a full-fledged kinyan in such a way that as a result of his ownership, he does not have to return the object, then he certainly could use it for schach. Again, he has an outstanding debt to compensate the nigzal, but as far as the chefts of the schach is concerned, that's totally his. And he made a full-fledged acquisition over the schach. So it's very interesting. There are two things that always strike me about these sugyas. Number one, that a gazlan could actually acquire ownership on something. It's a pellet to me. It almost rubs me the wrong way. I mean, he's like a chote niska. You steal something, you don't even have to return it. Why? Because you made a shinui. So there's a classic case of shinui where you steal grains and you grind it. The gazlan grinds it up and he makes it into flour. And has a different function, a different entity. This is a less radical kind of change because, when he puts the schach up on his sukkah, it still looks the same as when he stole it. But nevertheless, it's a shini Hashem. And through that shini Hashem, he acquires full-fledged ownership. He doesn't return the wood. That means the nigzal has no recourse to demand his wood back because the Gaza was kona a full-fledged kinyan through shinui. And once it's his private property, he could be yotzi the mitzvah of schach. But let's just think about the following. In the case of Tokev, Eschavero, Votzio, Misukaso, in that case, if we hold karka in an exelis, it means that the Gaza could not acquire a kinyan over the karka of the nigzal. So the nigzal gets recourse to get his karka back. Hence, the sukkah becomes a sukkah gzula. And gzula basically means that the apron strings are still attached to the nigzal, and the nigzal still has monetary rights to demand his object back, in this case, his sukkah back. So that gives it the status of a sukkah gzula if you hold karka and exelis. No, I'm sorry. If you hold karka ain't an exelis. If on the other hand you hold karka and exelis, then we have a different psul called sukkah gzula. Now the Gemara says, Midik Tani. Wait, I skipped two words here. Miman. How do I derive this? Midik Tani dum yadur shusarabim. Right, the Brisa has a case, as we began today, with Masechet b'Shusarab. And that's a Succa Gzula because he took away the Rishusarab. Rishusarab karka lav di dehu. is Succa nami lav karka didehu. So basically, Rav Nachman is going to prove that the machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Chachamim addresses the case of mechuber lekarka, meaning of a sukkah that is attached to the ground. And we see that from the fact that the Brisa mentions two cases, Succa Gzula and Rishus Harabim. In the case of Rishus Harabim, we're talking about karka that belongs to Rishus Harabim. And in the case of Succa Gzula, we're also talking about karka that belongs to the Nigzal. And if the karka belongs to the Nigzal, let's say karka in an Nigzeles, then according to Rabbi Eliezer, you have a Sukkah she'ula, and you don't have bailus over the Sukkah. And the Chacham, as we said before, don't require bailus over the Sukkah. Now, the only thing I don't understand here in this sugya, but I'm sure there are other things, but what happened to the principle of mitzvah bab avera, which means it would have been impossible for him to fulfill the mitzvah unless he did an avera. And in the case of lulav agazel, that's exactly what we said. He didn't have access to this lulav until he stole it. And if through stealing, and he violated the Isser of lo sigzel, he acquired, I don't mean legal possession, but physical possession over the lulav, then he cannot be yotzi his mitzvah of lulav. Why not apply the same principle to sukkah?
Because are they saying maybe that it's not really an avera once there's a shinui? It's counterintuitive, but maybe that's what they're saying.
Could be, but once again, we're not necessarily holding shinui. In the case of schach, where he stole metaltalin, eitzim,
right?
That I understand might not be mitzvah b'aver, but in the case where he threw the guy out of the sukkah, I'm not sure why that's not considered mitzvah b'aver. There was no shinui. He just simply removed him from the sukkah. I suspect that mitzvah b'aver only applies when the avera is somehow stamped into the chefza shel mitzvah. So, for example, if in the case of a lulav, which is metaltalin, the ganov acquires somewhat of an ownership on it, even without shinui. He still has to return the lulav, but nevertheless it's gazel because of the chovas hashava, and the status of the lulav has changed. It's an averidika lulav. That's the nature of the lulav, al pi din. But in the case of a sukkah, if we're holding karkated exeles, then nothing really changed over here. When he threw the guy out of the sukkah, there's no mixas kinyan or tchilas kinyan gzela with the chovas hashava. Just a matter of getting this guy out of the sukkah and replacing the original owner, the rightful owner. So the sukkah, insofar as its karka, could not gain the status of gzula. Amar Avina. Wait a minute. Hi, he sabta. Now, there's one part of the story I don't understand, the human part of the story, but the halachic part of the story I understand. The Asoy lekami Rav Nachman, Amra le, she told Rav Nachman, Reish galusa v'kula Rabbana debei Reish galusa b'sukkah gzula havi yasvei, Sov chavalo ashkech bei Rav Nachman. In other words, she was claiming that all the Rabbanan are sitting in a Sukkah Psula because they stole my wood. And Rav Nachman didn't pay any attention to her. That's the part of the story that irks me. I don't understand. Amrol Le, she said to him, Isasa dahavi le lavua tlas mea v'samne srei avdei tzovcha kamaychu v'losh gichisu be. I am the daughter of Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu had 318 servants. And you don't pay any attention to me? Hamalahu Rav Nachman, he turns to his Talmidim and he says, Pa'isa hida. She's a crybaby. The Einla Elad Mei Eitzim Bilvat. If they stole her wood, so then they made an acquisition, a kinyan, on the wood when they set it up as part of a sukkah, and they were yotzei the mitzvah of sukkah. So don't tell me that their mitzvah of sukkah is invalid. What she does have recourse for is to get paid, and she can gain compensation for the lost wood. But I don't understand why Rav Nachman didn't pay any attention. Just 1 second, I want to just check one thing out. Hear about this story that just let me see if I have anything here. I'm not finding anything here either. You have anything there? It just bothers me. Why?
Oh, I don't have an art school in front of me. I'm using a different Gemara.
Yeah, no, I'm using a Masechet, but I thought he would say something. Oh, Bishut Ksav Sofer, Toma, Madua lo ishgiach Rav Nachman b'tza'akasa shel aluva zu. Oh, okay, good. Ubir al pishitas haritva, asover shem gozal odom eitzim ubnoam b'sukaso v'tovo hanigzal b'soki me'achag ein lo eld me'eitzim bilvad. Okay, that we know. Ach, im himtin mi'utovo ad li'achar achag, chayav hagazon lahachzir se'eitzim atzma. The Rav of Nachman also isha chafetza sheyashivu lo es ha'eitzim. V'lo es tashlum dmeim. Al kein rotza litchosa ad liachar achag kedei shetuchal litlam bidin. Wow. She didn't understand what his ploy was. He was trying to push her off for her own better interest, that she should wait until after the Chag, because as we'll soon see in the Sugya, the Nigzal after the Chag has recourse to get back his Eitzim and force the Gazlan to take apart the Sukkah and give back the Eitzim. Aval hilo evino kavanoso, v'savra she'ena rotze lahatzila miyad oshkeha, u'mi'acha v'ra Rav Nachman she dochekes es hasha v'ena muchana lahamtin pasak she'en la eld me eitzim bilvad. And he had no choice but to paskin that she cannot reclaim her wood. At best, she can get compensation. Omar Avina haik shura de metal talata de gzula avdi le rabbanan takanta mishum takonas morish. What is takonas morish? Morish is a beam and the Goslin stole a beam, and in the meantime, he used the beam to build a palace. And now the Nigzal comes and he demands that the Goslin return the beam. Now, the Goslin is not going to play ball because he doesn't want to take apart a mansion. So they made a takana that once the beam has been used as part of a structure, the Goslin actually acquires ownership over the beam, and he doesn't have to return the beam to the Nigzal and demolish the entire structure that he built. So that's called Takanas March. Now, does that takana apply in the case of Succa? Intuitively, I would have said, if not for this Gemara, that let him demolish the Succa and return the beam to the Goslin. I'm sorry, to the Nigzal. I mean. So this is the case that I jumped the gun before, where the Goslin is using what he stole as part of the structure of the Sukkah, not for schach. So the Gemara says, Pshita, Maishna Me'etzim, we know that if a person steals wood and he builds them as a mansion, he doesn't have to return the wood. This was a Takanas Morich that was made in order to make it easier for the Goslin to confess his crime and do tshuva, so he doesn't have to take a tremendous loss and take apart his palace. And the Gemara assumes that this would apply even to a sukkah. Although again, I don't know how much of a loss he's going to take by he's going to suffer by taking a beam off of his sukkah, out of his sukkah. But so Gemara says pshita maludetame, I would have said eitzim shchichim. You know what? Rabbanan made a takana because they know that the Nigzal, if he doesn't get back his eitzim, he'll go down the block with the money that he gets from the Goslin and he'll purchase eitzim. He can replace it. Aval hai lo shchicha. But if he's not stealing eitzim, but rather he stole what's called a kshura. Kshura is a beam. So that you have to get, I guess, from the major, manufacturers, the big suppliers. That's lo shchicha. So we don't want to allow the Goslin to get away with it and force the Nigzal to go running around and finding a seller of a kshura, of a beam. Amash Malon, Ravina wants to tell us that kshura has the same halacha as eitzim, and once the Rabbanan instituted this takanas marich, it applies straight across the board, even in the case of lo shchicha, like the case of krisha, of kshura. Now the Gemara says, does the Nigzal have recourse to get back his eitzim after Sukkah? After Sukkah is over. Ani mili bego shiva. Yes, we can apply takanas marish if the Goslin steals the wood or the beam and he builds a sukkah during the 7 days of Sukkot. If the Nigzal comes to claim, I want my beam back, we'll apply takanas marish and will exonerate the Goslin from having to take apart the sukkah. However, lebasar shiva had to be after shiva, after the chag, the Nigzal could now sue the Goslin, and we will force the Goslin to take apart the sukkah and to return the beam that he stole. Vafil achar shiva nami yoyev leidvim. Sorry, I skipped. But what happens if, when he was building his sukkah, he didn't just use a beam on top of another beam on top of another beam, and he put the beam that he stole on top, just take it apart. No. He cemented it down. Now he's going to have to do a tremendous amount of work to remove that beam. Then, even after Sukkot, we'll apply Takanas Marish, and the Nigzal only gets recourse to compensation for the value of the beam. And that is the end of this sugya. So again, if the Nigzal was well advised, if he had a good lawyer, the lawyer would tell him, wait until after Sukkot and then come forward and put forward your claim against the Gazlan. Okay, now we go back to the Mishnah. Tana, we learned to the Mishnah, Yavesh Pasul, Rabbi Yehuda Machshi. So we're no longer talking about a stolen lulav or a stolen sukkah. We're talking now about a dry lulav, which means there's a psul of hadar. The Torah says about an esrog that it's got to be a pre-eitz hadar. It has to be beautiful. Once it dries up, it's no longer beautiful. So the Rabbanan pasal a lulav for the same reason that a dried esrog is possible. But Rabbi Yehuda holds, you know what? The Torah only described an esrog as a pre-eitz hadar. We don't have a basis for requiring that a lulav, or for that matter, a ravos or hadassim have to be hadar. Hadar is a specific requirement, a description of an esrog, and therefore yavish is kosher. Omar Rava machlokes belulav. Rabbanan Sabri Makshinon Lulav Liesrog, Ma Esrog Boy Hadar Af Lulav Boy Hadar, Rabbi Yehuda Sabri Lo Makshinon Lulav Liesrog, Aval Be Esrog, Divrei Akol Hadar Be'inon. So an Esrog HaYavesh is possible universally. And Rabbi Yehuda is going to concede that since the Torah describes the Esrog as pre-eitz Hadar, the requirement of hadar is critical, and an esrog hayavesh is possible. The Chachamim went a step further and they had a hekesh, because all four minim appear in the same pasuk. Ulekachtem lachem b'yom harishon, pre-eitz hadar, kapos tmarim, and af eitz avos, the arvei nachal. So we have here a hekesh between pre-eitz hadar, the esrog that opens up this pasuk, and the other three minim, and they all require hadar. And Rabbi Yehuda never accepted that hekesh. And it seems that hekesh is not something like a kal vachomer that you could derive logical conclusions. Hekesh has to have a transmission, a masorah. And Rabbi Yehuda never had that masorah. He never had that hekesh. Gemara says, "Belulav lo boy Rabbi Yehuda hadar." And now the Gemara is going to try over and over and over again to prove that even Rabbi Yehuda requires hadar and lulav against Rava. But Tanan, we have a Mishnah. Okay, this is a Mishnah that we had already earlier. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Yagdenu Milamala. Rabbi Yehuda requires agan, that you have to take the three minim and bind them together. My love, my time, allow mishum deboy hada. He wants to beautify these minim by binding them together. Lo, Hiriktani Taima, there's a brisa that embellishes this quote of this position of Rabbi Yehuda. And it says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabbi Tarfon, Hapos Tmarim Kofus. So the description of the lulav as kapos allows us to read the word kapos as kofus. It's exactly the same four letters. Question is where you put the vowels. And kafus means bound together. So this has nothing to do with hadar. You can have a dry lulav, but you bind it together with the hadassim and the aravos. And that's derived from the word kapos, and you read it as kafus. Let's say, for example, if haya parud, let's say the lulav itself is open, then you have to tie and bind together the lulav. Forget about binding it with the aravos and the hadassim. Again, another kash against Rav. Below Boy Hadar, Vatnan, we have a Mishnah. And this is a Mishnah on Daf Lamed Vav. The Mishnah is going to be quoted over and over and over again. Every part of the Mishnah, right here in our Sugya. Ein ogdim es halulav ela b'mino divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Which means that when you do the agad, you have to use one of the three minim as an agad. You cannot take another min, and it could be, just 1 second. Just 1 second. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we're not talking about the agad of all three. Just 1 second. He says, Ein ogdim es halulav. Ella bimino. Let's just see. Rashi is, I think, 4 lines up from the bottom. Hai lulav, hainu hoshana kula, shlosha saminim yachad. No, 1 second. Honestly, I don't know how to read this Rashi. Let me just, I want to do a little research here just to make sure I understand what's going on over here. We're on Daf Lamed Aleph, correct? Let's just see if by chance he has anything on this Rashi. I don't see anything here. So I don't know how to read this Rashi here. Ein ogden es halulav. Hello. Bimino. What does Rashi mean? Hai lulav. I know Hoshana. Oh, I see. The word Hoshana in Rashi refers to the 3 minim taken together. That's called a Hoshana. So the word Hoshana has 2 meanings. It either means Arvei Nochal, the Hoshanas, the Aravas, or Hoshana is a generic term that refers to all 3 together. So Rashi says, Hai lulav, when it says here, Ein ogden es halulav, he's referring to the lulav together with hadassim and the aravas. That's called the Hoshana. Loshes minim yachad. Ella bimino. Which I understand to mean that it's one of the 3 minim. So that's called mino because they're all bound together as one entity called the Hoshana. And in the footnote here in the Masechet, he writes, Omi min hadassim ve'haravos. So it could be from the lulav, from the adasim, or the arobos. It says b'mino b'loshen yachid, and now it means any of the three minim. Hainu mishum, just like we said it. She halulav adasim v'arobos nidonim k'min echad. That's why Rashi calls it Ochan. So when the Torah requires agad to combine these three minim together, then they're all considered like one unit, one entity, and you can take any of those three and use it to bind the three together. That's called mina. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Now, why? What would be so terrible if I took another min, a fourth min, and I used it as a rope to bind together the three minim? Lav mishum deboy hada. When it shares the same, he calls it mareu domil amara halulav, then that beautifies the lulav. But if you take, I don't know, some sort of red flower, then it undermines the aesthetic beauty of the dalit of the three minim. And that's against Rav, because Rav says that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you don't require hadar. Rav says, lo. Rabbi Yehuda is not requiring hadar. And Rav is right. The Omar Rava, afilu besiv, v'afilu b'ikara didikla, so he says that ikra didikla is klipas hadekel, I guess from the what do you call it, the base of the date tree. What's it called in English? Not a base, a trunk, right? From the trunk of the tree.
Yeah.
Afal pisha ein mareim domil amara lulav. So it's not going to be aesthetically pleasing, but nevertheless, it's still called mino. It's a bark of the tree, and you made it into a rope, but it's fine because it's mino. So obviously, we're not dealing with noi, with beauty. My time with Rabbi Yehuda, the kasava lulav tzarich eged, the ma'isa mina achrini, havile chamisha minim. If he takes a red flower and he uses it to bind, red rose, and he uses the rose branch to bind together, then it's considered part of the chefetz of the lulav, of the Oshana, as we called it, and he violates Baltosik because he's adding another min. The Torah wants these three minim and not another min. Ahavile, and together with the esrog, it's chamisha minim, it's 5 minim, and he violates Baltosik. So Rabbi Yehuda has nothing to do with the requirement of nine. Now the Gemara is going to ask another kash on a different statement of Rava about Rabbi Yehuda. Rava said that according to Rabbi Yehuda, esrog certainly does require nine. Ubi esrog mi boy Rabbi Yehuda hadar. For Asanya, we learned in a brisa, arbas minim shebelulav kshem shein pochasim mehem kach ein mosifin aleim. Lo matza esrog, lo yavi, lo parish, velo rimon, velo shum davar acher. Kemushim, this is the part of the brisa that we're concerned with. Sherit. But Yeveshim, psulit. Rabbi Yehuda Omer af Yeveshim. So Kemushim have begun to dry because there's no real moisture, but it's still not totally dry. And if it's Yeveshim, the Tanakama holds that it's possible. And Rabbi Yehuda says even Yeveshim are kosher. And apparently we're referring to Arbas Minim Chebelulav, meaning even the Esrog. You see that in Esrog, a Yavesh Legamre, is kosher, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Here we turn to Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. And the Gemara says, V'bnei Krachim. So we're talking about the big city slickers. Shayim Orisha Ves Lulaveim, Libneim, Libnei Bneim. apparently, to find Daled Minim, it was a little bit rare. It was hard. So the Dayarim in the big urban centers would bequeath their Daled Minim to their children and their grandchildren. Now, obviously, over the course of so much time, the Daled Minim are going to dry up, but they are desperate that their children and grandchildren should be Mekayim, the mitzvah of Daled Minim. And since they lived in the urban centers, they didn't have access to the fields out there where they grew the Daled Minim. So they really didn't have access to Lulavim. So they had to take Yevashim, even though over the course of time, till their children, grandchildren got to use it, the Lulav would dry up. And Rabbi Yehuda tells over this story to indicate that even Yavesh is kosher. Amru lo, so the Chachamim said that's not a proof. Bisham Raya, Ein Shasat Chak Raya. You can't prove anything from the fact that for Shasat Chak they didn't have access to a lulav. So better than nothing, they used something that's possible. At least it would remind them of the mitzvah of lulav. It's a memory device. So the children, the grandchildren would say, all right, we're taking that which looks like a lulav, so to speak. It's not a lulav. But you know what? If we do get access to a real lulav, then we're lucky. Rabbi Yehuda quoted this case of the city slickers as a proof that Yavesh, even if it's Yavesh Lagamri, it's kosher, and it includes all four minim. My lava esrog, it also includes the esrog. So an esrog Yavesh is kosher. I suspect that we're talking about Yavesh, but it's not totally dry. I mean, I could show you an esrog. It's like a little, it's a harder than a hardball. Yeah, I can't believe that's an esrog. What's this low?
Yeah.
Alulav. Now, I don't understand how you can get away with this alulav when it says explicitly Arbas minim shebelulav. So how is he telling me lulav? I don't understand. Unless he's changing the gears. I don't know. All right, let's see if we can push it a little 5 more minutes. Omar Mar, the Brisa says you cannot take less than 4 minim, and you cannot add a 5th min, shita. Why would I think otherwise? After all, even without the Brisa, the Torah says Bal Tosif. I think it's this week's parsha. Maybe. Malditem, I would have thought. Hoil v'Omer Rabbi Yehuda. Lulav tzarech eged. Imaisim min achrini. Hailechude koi v'hailechude koi. He took the 5th min in his hand, but he didn't bind it together with the other 3 minim. So it's lechude koi. It's not integrated into the cheftza of the daled minim, and therefore there's no baltosis. Kamash Malon that there are 2 dinim in baltosis. One is changing the cheftza, and the other is in the Maisa Mitzvah. In the Maisa Mitzvah, he took a 5th min together with the other 4 minim, that's baltosis. Omar Mar, lo motz esrog, lo yovi, lo rimon, lo parish, lo dovrachep shita. Do I think you could take a pomegranate as an esrog? Ma'odetem, I would have said, laisi ki heichadolo tisha kach toras esrog. Better than nothing. They'll remember, look, there's a pomegranate here. Well, what's a pomegranate? The Torah says take an esrog. But they'll remind themselves that there's something missing here. So that in future years down the line, when they get access to an esrog, they'll take a real esrog. A mashmalon, no, it's a bad idea. bad idea to run around with a, with a pomegranate or anything else. The nafik churva mine, the osila misra. After the course of years and years, people are going to think, a pomegranate is a creates hadar. After all, the Torah never uses the word esrog. Oshma, you tell me that even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that an esrog requires noi, it's got to be beautiful. What are you going to do with the following brisa? Esrog hayoshan pasul Rabbi Yehuda machshir. Tiyufta de Rava tiyufta. We see that Rabbi Yehuda explicitly is machshir an esrog hayoshan, and again hayoshan means it's all dried up. So the only question I have here is, okay, tiyufta de Rava tiyufta, but the Torah says creates hadar. What are we doing with the pasuk creates hadar? He says, in the name of the Ritva here in the footnote, he says, Nimtzash Rabbi Yehuda Eno Matzrich Din Hadar Biesrog. Imkain, Kol Psule Esrog Hamuvoyim Beperik Zeh. Right, at the beginning of the parak, we have Niktam Rosho, and we have also Bo Chazazis and Nikev and Niklaf, all these cases, Haim Shalok Kishitas Rabbi Yehuda. Shekain Tama Psul B'chol Elu Mishum Hadar. Why don't we find that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees in all the other cases in this parak? Ushmo olam, ela she'eno hada. All right, so we still have that question, but the Torah says creates hada. Lo boy hadar v'anan tnan hayoro kikarti. If it's very green, Rabbi Meir machshir Rabbi Yehuda posel. Lab mishum de boy hadar. What's wrong with a green esrog? I like a green esrog. The answer is it's not hadar. So you see that even Rabbi Yehuda in esrog certainly agrees that you need a pre-eitz hadar. And we just slugged up Rava. Lo, mishum de lo gomar peri. We need a chal Hashem pri. The Torah says pre-eitz hadar. And if you use you cut off the esrog before it matures and develops, it's not a pri. Hence, it's invalid for the mitzvah of lulav, of dalad. This could have repercussions in Zroim as to whether or not Yechayev in Shvius and Trumas and Ma'aser so wherever the Torah requires a pri. Toshma Shir Esrog Katan. Rabbi Meir Omer Ke'egos. Rabbi Meir allows an esrog as small as a nut, a walnut. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ke'beitz. It has to be as large as an egg. Lav, shouldn't we assume? Why does Rabbi Yehuda disqualify an esrog that's as small as a walnut? Mishum de boy hada. And we just slugged up Rava and we said, no, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't require hada. Araya, he's machshir and esrog ayovich. Lo. Mishum de lo gomar peri. Rabbi Yehuda insists that if it's so small, the size of a walnut, then it must be that it's not Kamar Peri. You plucked it prematurely, you didn't give it a chance to mature, and therefore it doesn't have a shem pri, hence it's possible that it's not pre-eitz hadar.